You probably know that Jesus healed people, like giving the blind sight. And while that was great for the people who lived 2,000 years ago and were healed, what difference does that make to us? Well, today we're going to answer that question on Jesus Basics. Welcome to Jesus Basics, who, what, and why it makes a difference. I'm Joe Greene, speaking to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts. This is the 7th video in a series designed to help you consider one of the most famous people of all time, Jesus Christ. And we do that by looking at a book of the Bible called the Gospel of John. And we ask, what did Jesus say and do, and what difference does it make? There's a discussion guide in the description below that will help you in your own study or in group study. There's also a link to some of the groups meeting in my church. Well, today our focus passage is on John chapter 9, when Jesus heals a man who was born blind. So far in this series, we haven't really focused on a story of Jesus healing, even though there are several of them. Well, today that all changes because chapter 9 details the account of Jesus healing a man who was born blind. And we're going to look at the whole episode, but we'll also skip a few passages for time's sake. So let me start reading in John chapter 9, verse 1. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "It was not this man that sinned, or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming, when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. So here, Jesus, he heals a blind man by making mud and putting it on his eyes. But the episode actually begins with the disciples asking Jesus if this man was born blind because he sinned, or if the man was born blind because his parents sinned. Now, this goes to a very common belief in that day that a bad thing happened to you because you did a bad thing, or your ancestors did a bad thing. It's kind of like karma. But Jesus, he pushes against that idea, and he says this person's difficulty, it's not a punishment, but it's an opportunity for God to work in his life. It's an opportunity for God to bring his full and final kingdom to bear on this person's situation. And this teaching, it's important back then, but it's also important today, because what if, think of it, the difference it would make if we looked at suffering, sin, and death as a space for God to work in. Now, we often look at things the opposite way. We think, oh, if God is good, why does he allow pain and suffering in the world? But the biblical view is, no, God is doing something about the sin and suffering in the world. In fact, Jesus is the culmination of God addressing sin and suffering in the world by entering into that and having victory over that. We'll look at that theme a little bit later. But it also, the biblical idea is it looks forward to when God will fully and finally do away with all sin and suffering. So the issue is, well, we just don't like God's timing. We want him to fix it all now. But he is working on it. And even now, it's not that, oh, God will do it someday. Even now, God breaks into our world. He brings healings. He brings the supernatural. And that points forward to that full and final cleansing, that full and final healing and getting rid of all sin and injustice. And now this particular miracle, it points towards Jesus. Jesus being the bringer of the kingdom. Jesus is going to restore and heal and forgive. And that's beginning to break in to this man's life who is now healed. So now we're going to skip verses 8 through 12 because those just tell about people starting to find out about this man and like, was this really the guy who was blind? Because now he sees. So we'll skip to verse 13. They brought to the Pharisee the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, How can a man who is a sinner do such things?" And there was division among them. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? Since he's opened your eyes," he said, "he is a prophet." So just pause there. So the Pharisees, if you remember, they're a religious group that has quite a bit of influence among the people. And they don't like that this healing took place on the Sabbath day of rest. And as we saw in the last video, there's a lot of division. Jesus, his words, his works, it's starting to cause division. And so it is with this group. Now we're going to skip verses 18 through 23, because then in that section, the Pharisees called this person's parents to make sure, is it legit? Was he really legit born blind? And they confirmed that he was. So we skip down to verse 24. So the second time they called the man who had been born blind and said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "Whether he's a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I've told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" And they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we don't know where he comes from." The man answered, "Why, this is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born in utter sin, and would you teach us?" And they cast him out. All right, so things are starting to get really testy. The man, he's simply telling them the story of what happened, but because they don't like it and because of what it implies about Jesus and what this man seems to be implying about Jesus, they reject his story and they reject him. And he was canceled, basically. And now we see the same patterns in our society today. We automatically reject things that don't fit into our preconceived ideas. We surround ourselves with people and with media that just confirm the things that we already believe. And so what happens is we become blind to the truth, or at least a part of the truth. And that's what's happening here with the religious leaders. They'd already chosen to be against Jesus, but now, as the division spreads, they're not just rejecting Jesus, now they're rejecting this person who he touched, whose life he changed. And this man is rejected for telling his story about how Jesus changed his life. Now, if you're a Christian, this is going to happen to you if it hasn't happened already. And if you are not a Christian, then I warn you that yes, I want you to have a relationship with Jesus. I want you to trust in him and have the living water and the light and all the things we've talked about throughout this series. But it's not going to be easy. People will reject you. People, they don't like what they don't understand. And a lot of people don't understand Jesus because he is supernatural. And this is what's happening with this man. He had a life-changing encounter with Jesus, and he thought, oh, now I'm going to be a full member of the community because now I can see. I don't have to beg anymore. But no, he is cast out of the community. So let's continue in verse 35. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I came into the world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things, and they said to him, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains." So interesting. Jesus seeks this man who had been cast out and says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And when he said, "Well, who is the Son of Man?" Jesus says, I'm the Son of Man. Now, what does that refer to? The Son of Man is probably a messianic title. It's a title for the Christ. It refers to Daniel chapter 7, when one like the Son of Man is going to come and bring God's kingdom. And this man, he believes in Jesus and he worships him. And so we could say, oh, this touches on themes that we've looked at before in the Gospel of John, that this man believes in Jesus, he worships Jesus, and his life is changed, right? But that's not all that happens, is it? because this miracle then becomes an object lesson in spiritual blindness and Jesus' mission to help people see heavenly truths, heavenly realities. But not all want to be healed of their blindness. If they think they see fine already, then they don't want to be healed. And that's what Jesus means, I think, and I'll put this back on your screen, verse 39. Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." So it's those who recognize their need, those who recognize their blindness, who come to Jesus and have their spiritual eyes opened. Now, those who are all set, who don't come to him, and they don't see the truth that he brings, and they're therefore blind, which applies to the Pharisees, who think that they see all things, they have all insights, they don't know Jesus, but they don't see the truth of Jesus. They're blind to it, and that's the tragedy here. All right, so let's finish with our 3 questions that we always ask, and that is, what did Jesus say and do? How does that inform the Christian faith? And how might that make a difference to life today? All right, well, what did Jesus say and do? Well, he healed this person. This is a miraculous inbreaking of the supernatural into the natural world. He changed this man's life. We also see that Jesus used this healing to teach his followers that the suffering in the world is actually a space where God can work in that and God can be glorified. He also used it as an object lesson for the spiritual blindness that we all need to be cured of. But some will refuse to admit their need, and they'll be blind to Jesus. They'll be blind to his work, and they'll therefore continue to reject Jesus, and they'll even reject those who claim to have been changed by Jesus. That's what happened with this man. Now, how does this inform the Christian faith? Well, the Christian faith starts with admitting our need, admitting our blindness, and looking for Jesus, for God to open our eyes. So that means Christians, we're supposed to be humble. And I know oftentimes we don't exhibit that humility very well. But Christianity, it starts with admitting our need, admitting our blindness, and looking for God to open our eyes. Now, how might that make a difference in our lives today? Well, we're all born spiritually blind in varying degrees, just like we're all born with the 5 senses, hearing, touch, taste, smell, and we have different degrees of that. So some people can see well, some people can't see. Some people hear well, some people can't hear at all. But we also have a spiritual sense, and that spiritual sense is what gives us that connection to the eternal, that moral sense. And we all have that, but it doesn't work right. That's the human condition, is that spiritual sense does not work right. We have spiritual blindness because humanity, we've separated ourselves from God. But we all have that sense for the eternal. And we try to fill that need for transcendence with all sorts of things. Well, Jesus claims to bring the light into the world and to bring that healing of our spiritual blindness so that we don't have to stumble around anymore in that state of not really being able to see, but knowing we're supposed to. And when I say see, I mean the spiritual and eternal. And so even now, maybe opening yourselves up to Jesus' claims, you've probably already started to see things in a different way. Well, no matter where you are right now, if you admit that you don't always see things clearly, and ask Jesus to continue to open your eyes and see what happens, he will open your eyes, and there will be change of life. That's all the time we have now on Jesus Basics. We'll see you next time.